Welcome to Status Quo, your home for gaming trends past and present. This is Queasy Crayfish, joined as always by my esteemed colleague,
Mars Vindicator.
Yes, Mars Vindicator. How's Mars Vindicator doing this fine morning?
Mars Vindicator is doing wonderful.
That's a good thing.
Bought some great games yesterday.
Some great games? What did you buy?
I bought Vagrant Story, Xenogears, and Persona 1.
Well, those are all trash, but anyway. No, I'm just joking. But yeah, this is a morning episode. We're recording this in the morning. Usually we're like, late at night, it seems like. But
right.
so pardon the froggy voice and the coffee drinking, but we're here also. It's the time of recording this is, August 2nd. So
That it is.
You'll be getting this on Monday, and that'll come into play later on with one of our topics, because we're talking about EVO. We're talking about, the biggest fighting game tournament in the world, held every year around this time. And we also have some other interesting topics. OverUnder, that segment returning again, talking about controllers and cheating in games and how that's sort of changed over the years. And finally, women in games. I know we're going to get super controversial, and we're going to be, super misogynist this episode, just so you guys know.
You might as well cut it off now.
Yeah, cut it off right now. Actually, we won't be. We'll be quite the opposite. But anyway, I think it's time to get started with some morning flake news. Nothing like some flake news over a steaming hot cup of coffee.
Morning edition of my millennial avocado toast. Yeah, I'm ready.
Avocado toast. I wish I had some. Unfortunately, I'm fresh out.
See.
Well, first of all, Def Jam is possibly teasing a new game.
I mean, No, I just said I don't want to spend a lot of time on flake news, and here I am pondering into oblivion. It's tight. Like, I don't want to play with Lil Yachty or nothing like that. You know what I'm saying? But if it has like a throwback cast of Ludacris and all them, I think it'll be dope. So I think those were really, really surprisingly dope games being based off of licensed subject matter. So yeah, as long as the roster isn't Lil Yachty and Tekashi 6ix9ine and Lil Pump, I'm all good.
Yeah, I don't even know these rappers nowadays.
Exactly.
I remember what it was. It had like Redman and Ludacris and stuff. That was definitely a cool cast. Def Jam Vendetta. But yeah, it's just on Twitter. They posted a hypothetical cover art, and it was like, who do you want to see on the cover of a hypothetical, all caps, Def Jam game?
See.
So yeah, good.
And actually, it would be cool too if they did something for Fight for New York, because I don't know why, but like, considering the type of game it is, it's actually really rare and expensive. It's like $60 still on PS2.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they were fun. So, not flake news then.
No, I'll take
real
that.
News. Okay. Well, we're 1 for 1 so far. How about this one? This is the according to a Post edition right here. Yakuza 6, according to Sega's fiscal year earnings report, was listed as a 2019 game and listed as a PS4 and PC game. So does this mean Yakuza 6 is heading to PC next year?
Yeah. Because Yakuza 0 just came out on PC like today or something.
And what do you think about that?
That's tight. I mean, yeah, it's tight. Sega's been putting a lot of stuff on PC, more fans, another way to attract Western fans. So that's tight.
All right, then. Third, we have Final Fantasy VII Remake, according to a job posting at Square Enix, is an action game, not an RPG.
And here I am saying I didn't want to swear on here anymore, and I just want to say F Square. So
Yeah, this really bugs me because I feel like turn-based games have really fallen out of favor just across the board. And nobody wants to make a traditional turn-based RPG anymore, even though I love those. Like, I'm playing Octopath Traveler right now, and I wouldn't have that combat any other way. So
Right.
I definitely, I didn't like the combat in Final Fantasy 15. I don't like these action RPG things just because they're never as good as like a real action game has combat, and they're never as interesting and strategic as turn based, and so it's just this awful middle ground, as we always say.
And I knew it wasn't going to be turn based, but when you say action game, do you mean like an action RPG or like an action game?
It just says action game.
Oh, well, I mean, either way, at this point, I still feel like because I'm not a big 7 fan anyway. And I knew Square was going to find a way to, square this up. So,
yeah, it's going to be a big, epic action game, hack and slash. So next up, we have Dead or Alive 6 has revealed 2 new characters for their roster, and they're both male characters. We have Diego, who is a Street Fighter and is a new character, and we have the return of Rig from DOA 5. And contrast this with the news from a couple weeks ago where Street Fighter 5 is releasing some brand new swimsuit costumes.
So Street Fighter is the new DOA.
Basically.
I mean, even when Dead or Alive first came out, it had breast physics like on the PS1 and the Saturn. So I know that they're not going to stray from that for real. I think that they're just trying to, approach it in a bit of a different way. So, I definitely don't think it'll be as bad as 5 per se, but, it's still going to be Dead or Alive. So this isn't, to me, I don't take this. It's not like I don't find like them announcing these characters as like significant in the sense that like, oh, they're males. It's just like, oh, 2 more characters for the fighting game. Like, that's just how I'm looking at it, because it's still going to be Dead or Alive.
For sure. Well, finally, and this was sent to me late night last night by Mars Vindicator, and so I had to include it. Parents are apparently now hiring pro Fortnite coaches to teach their kids how to be better at the game.
Well, this is where I draw the line. I love video games. Okay. Don't get me wrong. I love them. And I look at them in a certain way, and there's some different things about video games than there are about, say, sports. Okay. I'm not going to say that an online game can't foster teamwork, because it does, but I think that there's a different and very important human element that goes into having teamwork in a face-to-face environment, right? So which is why, to me, it doesn't matter if you have your kids play soccer, baseball, basketball, whatever, they're playing sports. And you could even argue that, they could play solo sports as well, but that still fosters other types of, communication. And I remember watching a video back in the day where like this guy was kind of holding this like fighting game camp, and like all these people came over there with arcade sticks. And I remember I was like, that's cool. So why do I think this is whack? And I think the reason why I thought that was cool and this is whack is because like that was just like a bunch of guys who decided to go do that. To me, it seems a bit strange for parents to actually hire a tutor for their kids to play Fortnite. So, that's not just flake news. It's, to me, it's supposed to the end of humanity.
Well, exploitative, by the parents, I feel like, or excuse me, by the Fortnite players, because it's like, if parents are going to, well, I guess exploited by the parents too, because it's like, I don't know, this strikes me as like, we're gonna train little Johnny to be really good at the piano, and we're gonna slap him on the wrist every time he misses a note or something like that, because we want to get him into some elite school and make millions of dollars for us. Like, I don't know, it just seems like one of those kind of things. And also just like the Fortnite, quote unquote coaches, like, if people are going to pay for this, why not do it? Even though it's just silly, because this game isn't going to last forever. It's going to die at some point. You're just trying to cash in on the current fad right now and esports and all of that. And I just think,
yeah, like that's the crazy thing about it. Like, even if you exploit your kid to make them play the piano, like
piano's not going away.
It's not going to cease to exist. Like Fortnite had like it's going to end because it's an online based game. Someday the servers will be shut down. So yeah, that's just crazy. Like, yeah, I'm done.
All right. Well, that's enough flake news for this week. Let's get into our first topic of the day, which is the Evolution Championship Series. That is EVO, the biggest fighting game tournament in the world.
Not to be confused with Hyper EVO.
Not to be confused with Hyper EVO. And it's being held in Las Vegas starting tomorrow, because we're recording this on Thursday. And it's starting August 3rd. And it will be, forgive us for not having the results, obviously, but by the time you hear this, you'll be, well versed in all of that. So maybe next week we can touch on the results of the tournament a little bit. But I never really knew anything about EVO until I saw that video of the Daigo full parry against Justin Wong in Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. And that was one of the, the most famous fighting game videos of all time. And it just craziness. And I was wondering, what is this tournament? And, all these people here watching them play this game, and these mysterious Japanese players, and look how good they are. They parried the entire super combo or whatever. And that was always fascinating to me. And it wasn't until years later when I started watching like fighting game streams and whatnot that I discovered what EVO was, and I started to actually watch it. And it was really awesome to watch like these smaller tournaments this is like when Twitch was first blowing up as well, and everyone was streaming, especially in the fighting game community, and watching all these small streams and local tournaments in New York or, on the West Coast, and learning all these new players and seeing them in action, and then seeing them on the big stage at EVO. And, I have a lot of great memories from those years of watching these tournaments, and it's always a big event on Twitch. If you go on there, I'm sure it'll be the number one stream this weekend. But, big things I remember, of course, the Daigo full parry, famous video, Justin Wong and Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and his amazing comebacks with his, X-Men teams and whatnot. Filipino champ, notorious villain who was, always talking trash on stage and whatnot. Eris, one of my favorite streamers to watch now, kind of notorious figure back then because of some things that went on with Street Fighter Cross Tekken and some streams that he did at that time. But just a hilarious guy. Lots of great content that he does on his stream, and it's always fun to hear him do commentary at EVO. Tom Brady, another just notorious villain, Mortal Kombat player. And then, of course, the commentating duo Ultra David and James Chen, which were like esports level, ESPN level back in a time when esports wasn't even a big thing, and just countless other things. So I think EVO is definitely, it's a very fun time for not just fighting games, but for video games in general. And it's a fun event to watch. And, I would encourage everyone to watch it this weekend if you like video games at all. So Mars Vindicator, I know you're not you're not huge on watching games per se. You're more into playing games. But I know you remember the full parry. I know you remember all of that stuff. I know you've seen the spectacle of EVO, and I know you've seen, just the rise of esports. So,
most definitely. I like that. I like that EVO exists. And it's never been something that I've like followed regularly. I do it, which is funny since I do actually I like to play fighting games a lot. It's never something that I follow regularly, but I think I follow it probably like a lot of, people, or, follow something like the NBA, where, I still know if something really huge happens, I'll see it. I still kind of get, what games are big, in the tournament, et cetera, et cetera. And so I guess this year, that's kind of like just the things that I looked at. what's really interesting to me, as I'm pretty sure is interesting to a lot of people, is the lineup of games this year. Is it just shows how much things evolve, and even something like this can evolve. I was just looking at some of the like, I guess the first EVO was technically in 1996, but then they then I guess there was like a lapse, and then it was like, then it started then went to 2000, and just had like a different name, or whatever. But it was 100% dominated by Capcom games, and I guess the first one was just Street Fighter 2 Turbo and Street Fighter Alpha 2, right? And then it just kept going on and on and on and on that way until, like, it looks like Tekken 4, Tag, Soul Calibur 2, and Virtua Fighter 4 were brought in. But before that, it was all Marvel vs. Capcom, Street Fighter Alpha, Street Fighter 2, Capcom vs. SNK. We look at it this year, and there's only one Capcom game, right? We just have Arcade Edition, Street Fighter 5, and there are 2 Smash Brothers games, which is crazy to me, because that, Smash had always had, while it had always had its fans, there was kind of like this long struggle for it to be accepted by the fighting game community. And now we have 2 games here. And the interesting thing is, not only do we have we have 2 Smash Bros games that are being played, and then we have a Smash Bros game that's coming out in December. So I know that will probably be there in some form or fashion. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of playing of 3 separate Smash Bros games at EVO, while there's only one Capcom game that even deserves to be there, because regardless of the fact that MVCI is there, I don't think anybody's going to deal with it too much, because we all know it sucks.
Absolutely. Well, and it kind of just goes to, the evolution, no pun intended, of this
right.
tournament over the years, because not only does it go from being a Capcom dominated tournament with, multiple games and everything, but it goes from being this thing that was in, just like a small crowded room where the players are right up next to the fans and everyone's screaming in their ears and whatnot, to going to, these convention halls and having a little stage where people can go up onto. Now it's in the, the Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, and it's on this gigantic stage, and, like a stadium seating practically. And it's, I guess I don't want to draw any like correlation between the two, but I kind of wonder. I mean, like Street Fighter 5, everyone knows, is kind of not as fun to either play or watch as Street Fighter 4. I mean, of course, people will defer on that, but I think it's like the general consensus that these Capcom games are kind of just not as good as they used to be. And we're seeing so many new, Fighter Z had the most entrance this year. And the funny thing too is, like, Tekken 7's the biggest Tekken game ever. We're, seeing huge record turnout for that. And there's a lot of games that are still going to be missing here at this EVO. Like, we're not going to see a Mortal Kombat game this year. We're not going to see Soul Calibur yet. So, potentially next year it could be even less Capcom based. And right. I think that's interesting, the way Capcom had always eternally been linked to this tournament, and now at the time when it's kind of flowering the most, it's kind of getting away from them.
I think another interesting thing to see will Smash Bros. Ultimate replace both Wii U and Melee? And again, that's just crazy, because Smash, for a long time was not even looked at as a big fighting game, but we all know that Melee is the end all be all. It's in a way, Melee is kind of like the new Street Fighter 2, or like the new MVC 2, where, like, even though sequels exist, that game was just so good that people still use it as like this central one to play. Mm-hmm. So if Ultimate can replace both of those games, I think that'll be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know Blast Blue Cross Tag Battle was one of the main games this year. Yeah, and I had been interested in seeing that, and that's an interesting game too, because that is like a mixture of 4 different game series. So it's cool to see that up there. Yeah,
and that's Arc System Works as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so they have 3 games.
I know, that's really fascinating, actually.
Yeah,
like taking over.
Yeah, they have 3. Namco has one Warner Brothers has one, Capcom has one, and Nintendo has two. Like, never in my life would I have thought EVO was dominated by Nintendo and Arc Systems Works. Like, that's great.
For sure. Well, everyone, I hope you enjoy watching EVO this year. I hope you all do watch it, and I hope you support your favorite games and, so on and so forth. It's fun. It's definitely fun. Every year I love, especially the last day, the top eights sometimes can get crazy. So, and see it, even though I was saying all that stuff about Street Fighter V, it's going to be fun to watch it because there's always, it's always fun to watch the top Japanese players, the gods, as they call them, come in and go against each other and take out whatever remaining American players are in the tournament. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. Our next topic, and this could kind of lead off of that because there's a lot of choice of controllers and whatnot at EVO. I mean, some people play pad, some people play stick. Some people play, Dance Dance Revolution dance pad. Some people play fishing controller. Everyone's got their own preference.
Oh, yeah.
But talking about controllers over time, because we're both basically console gamers. We're well versed in the controllers. What do you think is the most overrated or underrated controller? And now I'm going with overrated today. And just to lead this off, I'm going with the Nintendo 64 controller.
I knew it.
You knew it was going to be okay. I figured it had to be either that or it had to be the GameCube controller. That's I'll just leave it at that for that one. But the N64 controller, while it was cool and it was a unique design, and I still think it looks cool, and I still have a certain affinity for it because I grew up playing the Nintendo 64. Ultimately, you have to recognize that this design is just kind of ridiculous because, it has three different, handles that you can grab onto, and you can only use either the stick or the D-pad, at once. Like, you can't use them both in conjunction because it's just not, I guess you could hold the stick and the D-pad part, but that would be ridiculous.
And not use the buttons.
Yeah, you'd have no buttons. And there were no games that took advantage of it. In fact, there was very few games that even took advantage of the D-pad on the Nintendo 64. So it was kind of just useless, and it just kind of made for this strange shaped controller. And, putting aside all of what I think is just the fact that this controller was kind of cheaply made, and it feels cheap, especially now. I mean, if you find someone that has a Nintendo 64 from back in the day and they've played it a lot, chances are that stick is going to give you blisters. If it even works properly, it's going to be extremely loose, and the buttons are going to be kind of cheap feeling. The triggers, I don't know, it just feels like cheap plastic. Sometimes there's stuff loose in that controller. Z button doesn't work all the way. I don't know. C buttons can stick very easily. So I just don't think it was that well designed. I think it was really cheaply made, and I think that just like the console itself as well, kind of too was. I mean, it was super lightweight, couldn't really take much abuse. So if you had some crazy kids or you had dogs running around and stuff, I mean, it was just going to be damaged in one way, shape, or form. And I think just the setup of that controller, it made it so that you could only really play a certain type of game on it. And that's why there's no traditional fighting games on the Nintendo 64. There's no Capcom fighting games to speak of on the Nintendo 64. And I think that, they did get Mortal Kombat 4, but other than that, it's all just Killer Instinct and Dark Rift and kind of weird independent fighting games like that. And I think it's just that controller design ultimately was just very limiting, and it was good for what Nintendo wanted to do, but I don't think it was necessarily good for what third-party developers may have wanted to do. And so that's mainly why I would say that the Nintendo 64 is an overrated controller. And I do like it. I do think it looks cool. I love the Nintendo 64, but at the end of the day, I think that console probably would have benefited from a more traditional controller design, even though Nintendo rarely does that.
Well, there it is. Well, I do have a few things to say about that. After I give mine, but I do agree though. I do agree. It's some things in support of that. But I'm going to go with underrated controller. Okay, now this system, I wouldn't necessarily call this system I wouldn't call it underrated per se. It definitely didn't get as much fanfare as it should have gotten for a number of reasons. And we all know this system. Well, some of us do. A lot of people forget about it a lot though. And this is the Sega Saturn.
I knew it.
Now it's funny. It's very funny that you are comparing, that you're using fighting games as a basis to talk about the 64 controller and how that makes it not good, because by that same logic, the Sega Saturn controller may possibly be the best fighting game controller out there. And of course, this has to do with, if we're talking, it has to do a lot with if you're talking about Capcom fighters, and that's because it has 6 face buttons. Now it's funny because the 64 has 6 face buttons as well, but because of the way that they're aligned and they're so weird, and even the way that the C buttons, are just kind of small and look different, it doesn't really have that same appeal. But the Sega Saturn controller had 6, face buttons. Typically X, Y, and Z were smaller than ABC, but that it still worked. Now you may be saying this Genesis 6 button controller is nearly the same, but let's not forget that the Saturn also had L and R buttons. Okay, so we had a total there of 8 buttons. Now there was. In the US, they did officially do 2 different models. I think Japan only got the more simple version, which is the one that we all tend to see today is mentioned as the Sega Saturn controller, because that was the one that they re-released for like the PlayStation 2 and for the, on USB and things like that. Now that one that came out in the USA, I don't think is as good. It definitely speaks more to the feel that the US games had at that time. It definitely looks more, like some sort of technological piece. It's more boxy, has some squared edges, and the buttons and the D-pad have more design to them a little bit. But when I talk about the best controller, I'm talking about the one that was the Japanese launch one and the one that the US got later on. Okay, the one that's just a bit more simple. And it is just a great controller. And aside from the buttons, I mean, the D-pad is also amazing. You can just do Hadouken after Hadouken with that thing. And I mean, and I think, again, it fits well with the Saturn itself, because, the Saturn wasn't really big on 3D games. And for those games, they did actually make a separate 3D controller, which that's a totally different thing. But for the RPGs and for the fighting games on that system, it's just a perfect controller. It's simple, but it has everything. And that's kind of why I think the 64 controller was just kind of in a different realm, because, it was trying to be this next big thing. Whereas the Saturn controller was just like a perfection of the best Genesis controller. Another reason why I say it's underrated, another reason why I want to give this controller some of the praise that it is due, is because I can't think of a time in my life, save maybe the GameCube to the Wii, but that we all know that's a weird situation. When has the following system had less buttons than the system before that? So the Dreamcast literally took 2 buttons away from the Sega Saturn, and it just totally messes everything up, because again, Sega had a lot of the better Capcom fighters on that system. That, the Dreamcast has better versions of 2D fighters than the PS2 does, but you don't want to play them there because you have to use the 2 actual triggers on the controllers if you're going to play stuff like Street Fighter. All right. So it's just terrible. So not only is the Sega Saturn controller, not only was it great for its time, but it also was far better than the controller that came after it. So we got to give some praise to the Saturn controller.
Yeah, I agree. Interesting note about the 3D controller, though, is I feel like that design, although the 6 face buttons did not stay, was very clearly the precursor for, I mean, as we know, the Dreamcast controller, but also the Xbox controller.
Most definitely.
And so, I mean, if you like the Xbox controller, you really have to look back at that Sega Saturn 3D controller as the genesis of that. No pun intended.
and again, ladies and gentlemen, we're not just saying this. Do your research. Sega and Microsoft had a huge partnership thing going on at that time, which is funny because like Sega and Nintendo also did with the Super Nintendo. So it's like the big four used to be like, two tag teams.
Mm-hmm.
But what you were saying about the 64, it was funny the other day. I was game shopping the other day, like I am every day, and they had a complete and buy 64, and I was looking at it, and like on the box it says like the fun machine, right, or something like that, and and it was like get the chords, get the games, like it was like 64 to me was probably the last game console that it was like kind of a toy.
Yeah.
The GameCube sort of kind of was, but the GameCube was just a bit more, I don't know what to call it. I don't know, steadfast or something, like sleek.
GameCube was eternally trying to break out of that because I mean I feel like the GameCube when it launched it was like, look, it's for little kids, and it was eternally trying to be like, and 64 was to an extent too, because like when Conker's Bad Fur Day came out with the extra large M rating on it, it was like they were always going to these great efforts to be like, look, we're not just for kids,
Right. But yeah, but now that, yeah. So the 64, and then the 64 just had a huge contrast to the Saturn and the PlayStation at the time, which were, those two were both great pieces to a home entertainment system because they could play CDs, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. Well, one thing I do remember about having controllers was I did always have at least one controller that was like a third party one. And a lot of times I had a very fancy Sega Saturn controller, and it had the ability to do slow motion and had the ability to do all kinds of crazy things on it, which basically just meant it paused the game over and over again.
This is a great segue.
Yeah, it did. It did a lot of stuff that you weren't really supposed to do with your controller. And some might say it was cheating. And so our next topic of the day is cheating in video games. And the reason I wanted to talk about this originally was because, as our listeners may well know at this point, I'm a big fan of Pokemon Go. And a lot of the new updates to Pokemon Go have been they've been exciting updates, like trading Pokemon and so on and so forth. But they've always, after, you get over the initial excitement, you kind of realize, wait a minute, this is a useless feature. The trading system in Pokemon Go is in its current form, although they have just recently made a few changes to it, but it's basically useless unless you're a casual player, because it costs you so much Stardust to trade something that the other player doesn't have or that you don't have. And it also randomizes the stats of the Pokemon. So you might trade a really good, 98 IV Pokemon to somebody, and they'll get it, and it's like a 60 or a 50 or something like that. And it's totally random. The CP also totally randomized. And so it just makes that trade insignificant. And all of this is designed with the intention of cracking down on cheating, so that, people can't have two accounts and just trade all their great Pokemon to that account or whatever and do all kinds of stuff. And it's like, I understand that. But on some level, we have to get over this. We can't just design everything and nerf everything with the idea of eliminating cheating. And because, maybe it's just me, just biased growing up in the 90s, because back in the day, like I was saying, they used to just sell those controllers where you could just do all kinds of crazy stuff on them. And it was just a thing you did. Tips and Tricks was a magazine full of cheat codes for, every popular game, and then some. There was, the Game Genie and the Game Shark, where you just plug it into your console and you could access all these cheat codes and, basically like hacks for all of your games. And a lot of times the cheat codes were built into the games. And the last one I really remember doing this was Grand Theft Auto. But back in the day, just about every game had some kind of, button combination you could put in at the beginning on the main menu and access some kind of cheat codes or level select or infinite lives or whatever. So I think the way we've kind of gone to a place where we've made every single game this big competitive entity and trying to make it like this big official thing. And so nobody wants to accept the fun of cheating. Nobody wants to accept the fact that cheating may occur. And, I'm not a big fan of cheating. I think it's stupid, especially in like Call of Duty or something, when you look on the leaderboards and some guy has like 8 billion points and you just know they cheated. And it's like, why waste your time doing that? But I think it's like, is it really the end of the world if some people cheat, if some people game the system? No, I don't think it is. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, Mars Vindicator.
Well, I actually think that it kind of goes hand in hand with kind of what we were saying about the whole Fortnite thing. It's like I love video games. I really do. But I just don't take these things that seriously. I love to compete in fighting games, that's for sure. So if someone was cheating there, it would, kind of tick me off. But, if something has become a huge thing where, people are going into it to win a bunch of money and, okay, like this, for example, I was reading an article. I think I was reading an article about that Fortnite thing, and somebody was like, don't hire tutors to tutor your kids. You got to put your own blood, sweat, and tears into the game. And I was just thinking, like, I don't think I've ever referred to me playing a game as like putting my blood, sweat, and tears into it. I use that term for, manual labor, or maybe raising children, things that I just kind of hold to a bit of a higher level. And and again, I'm not saying that, that you don't take time to do things. But so I think a lot of the disdain for things like cheating comes from people, putting so much into these games. And then also, of course, just the fact that they are all online now and everything is a competition. Like you can't really even play you can't play a game like Fortnite without competing, right? And so then, of course, if there's cheating in it, then it's like, why are you even playing this? So I can definitely understand why people are not a fan of, cheating in that regard. At the same time, though, as I've gone back and played a lot of older Genesis games, a lot of Super Nintendo games, you do realize that cheating was almost necessary in games back then because, I was a kid playing something like Vector Man, but if I was an adult, and I had gotten up to like level 4 in Vector Man, and then my son had to go to soccer practice, I'm not going to be like, hold on, I'm playing Vector Man. You know what I'm saying? You're going to have to cut the game off and take care of your responsibilities. So yeah. And then when I get back home, I'm not going to want to go through levels, 1 through 3 again or whatever, because I have other things to do with my life. So I'm going to want those cheat codes to be able to just start right back at that level, Yes. So I think that for a lot of that stuff, it was just necessary. And we all know that. I'm sure if Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City or San Andreas was purchased by, 10,000 people, 10 of them beat the game without codes. Playing those games with codes. I mean, that was what made some of it fun. I mean, that added a lot to it. And the game was so fun that playing with cheat codes didn't even break it. So I think cheat codes have this, in my mind, they have this solidified place in gaming. I kind of wish that they would always be there, especially in games that are single player. There's one cheat code, or maybe I call it a cheat code if you want. But one thing I wish that should have been in games, period, is like in every RPG, they should just be able to start you right back at where I call the beat dropping, because I hate going through that whole entry thing every single time, Yes. So yeah, it's, you need these, nobody is going to want to get up to Mystic Cave every single time they play Sonic 2. Eventually you're just going to want to start there.
Yeah.
So
no, I agree. And those games a lot of times were really hard. So, and of course no save features. So it was just something that was kind of necessary to have. And it's just, of course, obviously there's a distinction to be made between a single player game and you're just cheating for yourself and your own enjoyment, and when you're playing in a competitive environment. But I mean, I think that's also kind of an issue that I have. I kind of don't like the way every game now has to be this big, competitive thing that you share with a billion people. Why can't I just, if I want to cheat, let me cheat. And if I don't want to cheat, I don't have to.
Right.
Because I remember being mad at cheaters. I remember Modern Warfare 2 was when that game came out, and the multiplayer in there was so, I don't want to say sloppily done, but it had so many holes in it that people could just cheat. And there was like the care package cheat where you could get like infinite care packages. And as soon as a person got one, it was just care packages incoming over and over and over again, and kill streaks everywhere. And it made the matches just crazy until they patched it out. And then there was the javelin glitch where you could equip the javelin rocket launcher, and you could do some kind of weird thing, and it made it so that whenever someone shot you, you would just explode in this enormous explosion that would kill everything within like a 20-yard radius. And and so playing those games while people were actively cheating like that was it was funny, and it was a little bit frustrating, especially if you're trying to take the game seriously. But it had this kind of weird, like, I don't know, it had this interesting vibe to it as well. Cause it was like, look what we've done to this game. We've we've broken the fourth wall in some ways. And, people just need to not, like you're saying, they just like, don't take this stuff so seriously. I mean, like there's just, no one likes to get killed because someone else cheated, whatever, but it's not the end of the world. We don't need to make features of the game useless just to prevent cheating, like in the case of Pokemon Go. And that's kind of what bothers me about it.
Exactly.
Well, I think that'll about wrap it up for that topic. But
let's see your transition here.
Yeah, cheating.
And women.
some people cheat, and some people cheat on their wives or girlfriends, but I don't know how I'm going to do this. Women in games, anyway.
Right. So you need a cheat code here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, see, the thing, this could easily be a controversial topic. And I think the reason that I wanted to talk about this topic was that there was this article posted on Polygon recently, my favorite website, and it was talking about gaming's toxic men. And it was all these interviews with, feminist professors and whatnot, and talking about, how men treat women online in games, which I'm sure is very true. And, the way women are portrayed in games and whatnot. And this was kind of the one aspect where I didn't fully agree, because I do feel like, and we have talked about this a little bit already, but growing up with video games, I think women typically in games, and while, yes, there are certainly cases where they are just treated as sex objects or whatever, at the behest of the male protagonist who's, beefy and burly. But I think actually more common is the complete equality between the male characters and the female characters. Like in any fighting game, there's just men and women fighting each other, and it's not an issue to see Sakura knocking out Zangief, like nobody takes exception to that. No one's like, oh, that's ridiculous, unless you're some baby boomer watching you play the game or something. But, so like just situations like that. And another great example is like Resident Evil. Like Resident Evil, there's no difference between playing as Jill or playing as Chris. I mean, you do separate adventures and everything, but I mean, like as far as just the characters are concerned, like they're equal. It's not like, oh, playing Jill is easy mode or something like that, or Knights, playing as Elliot or playing as Claris. Like there was no real distinction. They were just different stages. It wasn't like there was no bias towards one or the other. And there's, a whole list. I've got binders full of women here, female characters to mention. They are not just females in games, but are very important I think, characters to just, the full existence of women, or I mean, of video games, excuse me. I mean, Lara Croft, Joanna Dark, Samus, all of these characters are big major characters. I guess maybe not Joanna Dark so much anymore, but at the time, yeah, it was like a big popular character. Metal Gear Solid, you don't even have to think about that. I mean, you have Meryl, Sniper Wolf, Fortune, Olga, the boss, taught Snake everything he knew, or Big Boss rather. Of course, Jill Valentine, Claire from Resident Evil 2, Rebecca Chambers, all those characters, Sheva Alomar, Resident Evil 5, Sonya Blade, Chun-Li, Cortana from Halo, and, all the Final Fantasy ones, Tifa, Lightning, those characters, Nina from Tekken. I mean, Princess Zelda turned out to be Sheik in Ocarina of Time, was basically, teaching Link how to destroy Ganon in the first place. Alex Vance from Half-Life 2, Miss Pac-Man. You can go all the way back to Miss Pac-Man. So I think there's definitely some validity to the argument that, women are sometimes represented as, just sex objects in games. But I think that, obviously there's lots of cases of harassment of women in multiplayer games and whatnot. But I think also it's important to highlight the fact that women and female characters have been extremely important to just the way video games are.
See, okay. Now, and yeah, so, now when it comes to that whole list, I'm definitely there. Okay. I just found this other article on Polygon as well, right? Which is ridiculous. And I'm definitely going to come back and comment on that list. Okay. But okay, so they have another article, right? It says the number of women protagonists in E3 games is still in the single digits. Okay. Now they have a chart here. Okay. They have a chart here. All right. Games that allow you to choose is 50%. Okay. Gender ambiguous is 5%. Not applicable is 13%. Male is 24% and female is 8%. Okay. I see no problem with those numbers. I see no problem at all with those numbers. And you want to know why I see no problem with those numbers? Because I'm sure that most of the game developers are still male. Now, am I saying that is okay? Well, it's not about it being okay or not. It's about it being the truth. Okay. Now, see, I think the problem with all of this is that we always want to look at this topic from like, we want to tackle things, instead of going to the root, we want to tackle things at the branches or tackle it at the leaves. Okay. We're not going to get more women characters in games unless we get more women developers. Okay. How do we get more women developers? Not by arguing about, socialism, because I feel like you have a lot of minorities, a lot of women who are talking about, the social system, but then just go work at Taco Bell. Again, like, it's not that I have a problem working at Taco Bell, but it's like, yeah, like I'm not going to get anywhere. And I'm saying this as an African American man, because I've been through this before. I've been through, how come there's no black characters? Nobody wants to have a black lead in the game. Nobody's black this, nobody's black that. Well, you know how you can change that, Mars Vindicator? By becoming a video game developer, and yes, I mean, part of me is going to say that if I'm not going to do that, then I'm going to shut my mouth a bit. If it continues that most of the developers are Japanese men and white men, then that's who the main characters in the games are going to be. Now, am I going to say that there aren't some systematic barriers there that stop, maybe some that stop African American men, but a lot that stop women? Oh, of course. I'm definitely there for those issues. And this is where I feel like we need to be discussing. This is what I feel like needs to be brought up. We need to have better action plans and better things to get. Now, if there's any sort of program that's about getting girls into coding, getting girls into being game developers, I'm all for that, right? Because that right there is going to, that's going to heal this problem, the moment when something as big as Metal Gear Solid is being headed by, a person named, Emi Nakajima, right? Instead of Hideo Kojima, we're going to get, more women in the games, right? But trying to charge white males or Japanese males with making women or making minority leads, like it's not going to get us very far. Okay. We know this because the most popular, now we could argue this is because it was a movie, but still, like, Black Panther has never been as popular as he's been today. Right. And why is that? Well, that's because for so long, it wasn't a black person who was behind making him. But now, not only in the comic, but in the movie, you have it being done by black people. And it kind of makes the story a bit more genuine. So we definitely appreciate the fact that, the white artist or whoever was at Marvel even made a black character, right? But if you really want to make it something, then the people who are upset about it have to do it, And I mean, come on, like 50% where you can choose, like, that is huge, That's huge. And then I think another big thing about this is, again, a big issue is the number of women protagonists in E3 games. Like, who cares about E3 games? They all suck anyway. I want to see an article about the number of E3 games that actually end up being worth the $60 you spent on them, because most of that stuff is $3 in the trash bin now. So that's that. So yeah, if I had any reservations about these points before, that this definitely like cleaned it up. Now that I've actually seen the numbers, like I kind of think any talking about this at this point just has to stop. We need more women developers, and that's just that. And again. So that's that. So let's go back to that list. Because a lot of those characters, I'm not going to say all of them, but a lot of those characters were done by, male developers, so because even me, growing up, I can say that I definitely noticed, of course, that there were more males, in video games, but I didn't think that there was a quote unquote lack of women. I didn't think that like the numbers of women characters were so low. I didn't notice that you always typically played as males. They were typically on the front covers. Yes, I noticed that, but there were always huge female characters. And I felt that they were there enough to still let me see them as, equal beings to the male protagonists. A great example is, I mean, in Metal Gear Solid 3, I mean, at the point that I'm in the game right now, I mean, probably the three biggest characters in the game are Eva, Snake, and the boss, and two of those are women, and yeah, and I'm, and I don't want to sound like, well, I'm not racist. I got black friends. I mean, this is the truth, I mean, the person who even started all, like, there would be no Solid Snake if it wasn't for the boss, right? Because the boss trained the person that Solid Snake is cloned from. So you basically have no choice but to see women in a light, to see them as equal warriors if you're playing a game like that. You pretty much have no choice but to see women as equal warriors when you're playing a game like Tekken, because Nina, is one of, I mean, she's consistently been one of the better characters. She's always been in the games, and that's just Nina. You have Christy, you have Master Raven now, you had Kunimitsu, you have Michelle and Julia and Anna, And so, yeah, I don't know. I think that this is one of those things that I definitely see that there is an issue here, but just the way that we're trying to tackle it is just not going to help anybody. And I also think that they do a disservice to the huge female characters that have been in games, because like they are there and they are definitely prominent. I mean, like, like, nobody wants to write an article about this. Everybody was upset that Street Fighter 3 had none of the old characters in it, right? When they finally brought Street Fighter, like old Street Fighter characters to Street Fighter 3, the first, like, they brought Ryu and Ken, right? So like basically clones and like the main character of the game. The next most prominent character that had to come over was who? Queasy Crayfish?
Chun-Li.
Chun-Li. Right. So like not Guile, the person who headlined the whole American, status of Street Fighter at that time, not Zangief, not Dalsim, not Blanca, but Chun-Li. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, at this point, I just honestly think that these articles taken from this angle, yeah, I'll sit up here and I'll say it. I'll get controversial, because I'm always trying to be, Mr. Liberal here and, try to stop, Queasy or whoever from being controversial. But come on, ladies and gentlemen, 50% of games let you choose, 5% ambiguous and 13% NA. So we're left with a total of 32% games that are gendered. And then 8 of those at E3 had female leads. We're doing a lot damn better than we had in the past. Cause you don't want me to write the article about black leads in games. You don't want me to do that.
It's a short list.
Exactly.
It's a very short list.
But as a black person, I understand, like, we're not huge in the game industry. That's why I was saying we have no problem finding black basketball players. We have no problem finding black rappers. And yes, like I'm not unaware. I get that systematically we're kind of pushed into those fields. Well, not kind of, we are. Historically, we've been pushed into those fields. Okay. I definitely understand that. Right. And that is the truth. But I know I could have been a game developer. I could have done that. And I know that I have some power to assist, young black males in taking up these jobs and promoting these jobs over other things. Right. So, but before I go and make an article complaining about, lack of, black leads in games, I'm going to do that instead.
Well, very well said. Very well said. Just one other interesting thing that kind of occurred to me in thinking about this topic was, as far as like the sexualization of characters, of female characters, I think that's actually kind of like a relatively recent phenomenon, because you go back to like early games. The graphics were so poor and so primitive. Right. It's really not titillating to see, some pixelated woman. Like, there's really no sexual appeal there. It's just kind of like bad graphics, and so it's really more relatively recently that we've seen this. And I think that already we're starting to like clean that up. If you see that as a problem, I think that, yeah, like, we're already talking every new Dead or Alive game. It's like they have to try to get more and more, unsexualized, right. and trying to put more of a focus on, toning down the jiggling breasts and whatnot, because people just are already saying, we don't want this. We don't want this to be a thing. We don't want to feel like we're, playing some kind of porno game, when we're just playing a fighting game. And I think that's, so like there's progress being made, constantly in this. I think those numbers that you brought up definitely illustrate that point. It could easily be, if someone were to ask me to guess what those numbers were, it would probably be, no way would I guess that those numbers would be, 50-50 or even as high as they were. So, I think definitely there's some problems. We didn't really touch on harassment or anything like that, which is a whole nother topic. But I think that to act like there's no progress being made, or like people are overlooking these problems or whatever, I think is a little bit silly. So,
right. Yeah, it's to me, it's a little bit silly, and it just, oh man. I'm always like, Queasy, don't get controversial. And then here I am,
Well, we haven't had too many controversial episodes yet.
What I would just say is that, again, not saying that, the fight for all rights isn't important, but it's just always very interesting to me to see a lot of these things come out now about, we'll just say about like certain groups, right? Whereas like, such and such percent won't reveal that they're in this group, or such and such percent, has faced, discrimination from such and such. And it's like, well, trust me, I've been there, and it's not to say that, that these things shouldn't be stopped, but it's kind of like, there are a lot of other pathways to take to get over these things or help heal these things than writing articles on Polygon.
Well, yeah. And I mean, the article was not even really written by the author. It was just a collection of quotes from, like feminist professors and experts and stuff like that, which of course you knew what they were going to say before you even read the article. And I did read the article. But it's just like, yeah, I mean, of course, a gender studies professor is going to be talking about, the lack of female representation in games or whatever. I mean, do they play the games? Have they ever heard of Joanna Dark? I don't know. Right. They didn't say. Have they ever heard of Meryl Silverberg?
Exactly.
Characters, which aren't the main, like she's not the main character in Metal Gear Solid, but she's definitely an extremely significant character. And if you've played the game, like you instantly think of her when you think of Metal Gear Solid. You don't think of, it's not just like she's just some side character or something like that, or some damsel in distress.
And let's not even forget that she's also in Police Notes.
Oh, true.
So like Kojima, like, obviously likes her as a character and moves her from one series, to the next. And you see her have like this great growth as well, because she's a lot different in 4 than she is in 2.
Mm-hmm. And let's not forget that, I mean, Lara Croft was just kind of generic, to some degree, just like big breasted woman, with guns or whatever like that. But I mean, that whole, it ended up taking on like so much more significance to where now she's like, legendary character with all sorts of different interpretations. And she really, in the era that she came out and, really spawned like the whole like badass woman thing. I mean, that was like, the Matrix with Trinity and all of that stuff, and all kinds of other movies that had like, ass kicking women in them. Like that's, these are like trends that we can't just like ignore and just say, well, yeah, but I mean, like you can't just do that much of a disservice to some of these characters. Cause I mean, a lot of these are really important characters to video games as a whole. It's not just that like here are some women that were in games. I mean, like you were saying, Chun-Li is one of the most important Street Fighter characters. Right. Alex Vance, whenever you see a screenshot of Half-Life 2 or anything having to do with Half-Life 2, she's there. And Half-Life 2 is one of the, the biggest games to get released during that time. Cortana is eternally linked with the Master Chief and everything. I mean, all of the Resident Evil girls, all of that stuff. I mean, this is, these aren't just things that can be just discarded or put an asterisk by or anything like that. I think they're extremely important.
And I think another thing too, that I just want to, now I'm going to use Yakuza as an example for this. Now we get a lot of Japanese games that do a lot for women protagonists, but then of course you have, your anime big tit games, which I'm not a fan of at all, that you see all the time. Right. But take, for example, a game like, I feel like Yakuza 2 is just like the total, it's just the best way to explain this issue. I think another thing too is that I get that we can look at, a lot of Western games and make these assumptions and make these statements. But Yakuza is a slightly exaggerated, damn near 1-to-1 reflection of Japanese society. Okay. And I say this from experience, all the things that you see women doing in those games are things that they really do in real life. All the girls bars and a lot of the, even the different ways that they speak Japanese and the different ways that they act. I mean, it is very good at portraying the reality of Japan. So if you take the Yakuza series and you say that something in that game is sexist, well, ladies and gentlemen, you don't have a problem. You don't have a video game problem here. You have a societal problem. Okay. So if you want to complain about the Yakuza games, then I'd suggest that you go and study sociology at a Japanese university. Okay. And rally up a bunch of Japanese women and assist them in getting better rights and, better maternity leave and better things in their society. Because the moment Japanese women have more power in real society, they'll also have more power in the Yakuza games. Okay. So once again, if you guys want to make a change, then make it.
All right. Well, I think that'll about wrap it up for episode 14 of Status Quo. And, we apologize if we were controversial or not controversial enough there.
I hope I wasn't controversial enough.
Yeah, I hope so too. These are just, it's just funny because everyone's always like, nobody wants to have the difficult conversation, but then no one ever has it.
Right.
All the people that say that never have that conversation. And the moment someone starts to have it with them, they, block you or go run away or something or start screaming at you. So it helps to, get quote unquote controversial, I think sometimes. And that wasn't even that controversial, at least in my opinion. I mean, maybe if you're a gender studies professor, maybe it is, I don't know. But so yeah, this has been Status Quo. I'm Queasy Crayfish.
And I'm Conservative Vindicator. No, just kidding.
Conservative Vindicator.
Vindicator.
Anything we're looking forward to next week or in the coming week here?
In the coming week. You're talking about games?
Games or Hyper Evo or anything?
Talking about games.
Talking about games.
Games. I'm talking about games. Well, actually, no.
No, nothing. Yeah.
Not in the coming week. Nothing I can think of in the coming week here.
No. Well, dang.
My backlog.
You're back. Yeah, me too. Well, we have EVO to look forward to, so everyone enjoy EVO this weekend, and maybe next week we can talk a little bit about the results of that if we so choose to. But in the meantime, have a wonderful week, and we will see you next Monday for episode 15.
We're out of here.